Welcome to Veterans Never Stop Serving, and good day to all our listeners nationwide. We're privileged to have you listen in today as we highlight another post 9/11 wounded and injured veteran who has graduated from our Sentinels of Freedom Bridge to Education program. Our mission in these podcasts is to give these veterans an opportunity to tell their stories of selfless service in our nation's military, their injuries, post-injury rehabilitation, transition home onto higher education or trade schools, and into successful careers. Sentinels of Freedom is proud to report we have helped almost 700 of these wounded and injured veterans with our Bridge to Education program. Additionally, we've built 7 student veterans resource centers on college campuses in 3 states that support 2,500 veterans per year. Today, we are honored to have Specialist Jayme Hentig, U.S. Army retired, as our guest speaker. Jayme, your story is inspiring. You never quit pushing hard onto your objectives and goals. And look at you now. You have been on an incredibly long journey to success and now a doctor. With that said, please bring us up to speed on what you're doing now and what your future plans are.
Yeah, well, again, first and foremost, thanks for having me, Mike. I appreciate it. And I appreciate everything you guys do.
We call you guys Sentinels, by the way, and that's for your never-ending protection and guarding our freedoms. And when we came up with that name, somebody said, why do you call them Sentinels? And they said, look it up in the dictionary. You'll see it's an exact representation of what you guys do.
It's a strong name.
Yeah,
it's a strong name.
Yeah,
but yeah, I've been really fortunate in my journey. I joined right out of high school. I was kind of scared to go to college. Dad ultimately kind of gave me an ultimatum of
right.
Follow mom and dad's footsteps of being in a factory or go to college, or ultimately, think about maybe the military. And I didn't come from this lineage of service members, and I didn't really have this strong innate calling to serve. Ultimately, I was just a kid that was really afraid to go to college.
Right.
I was more willing to go to war than I was to sit in a college classroom. And Dad did his due diligence and made me talk to all the branches. And ultimately, the Army kind of stuck out. The recruiters I felt, respected and trusted with, and really I wanted to be an infantryman, but Mom wasn't okay with that. And so, we ultimately landed on becoming a combat medic. At the end of the day, my recruiter pulled me to the side and told me, hey, if going to the front lines is something you really want as a medic, the height of the war, you're going to go. So, we showed Mom like a cardboard cutout of a guy in scrubs and told her I'm going to be a nurse or a doctor. And at 17, I got to have her little signature. So she more than willing signed off. Neither one of us really knowing what we were getting into. So, I did my basic at Fort Benning, medical training at Fort Sam, going through Whiskey Land, went to airborne school, and then landed with the 173rd out of Italy. Great unit, go Sky Soldiers.
Right.
And ultimately, we deployed in 2009, 2010, and, you've mentioned your sons are a couple of your sons are medics as well.
Right.
Being a medic is, it's a great job. It really is. It's a very honorable job and passionate job, but I think it's one of the best jobs. I think it is also one of the hardest jobs. And so with that, I treated a lot of different types of injuries. Traumatic brain injuries were a big one. It's a signature injury of that time period of that war. And ultimately, I experienced one myself and found myself on my way out being medically retired for a brain injury and spinal injury. I spent about a year in Landstuhl, Germany, going in and out of hospitals, talking to neurosurgeons and neurologists. And, ultimately I was told, hey, like, this is the end of the road. You've seen OT, PT. It's time for you to leave and start figuring out, what your journey is going to be. So I started that transition home.
And I think that's the transition home is people don't realize how difficult it is. You've lost your your buddies, your tribe, so to speak. You've lost your purpose, and so in some respect, your story of joining the military mirrors my three sons. They didn't want to go to college; they wanted to go into the Army, and my youngest son was headed to college, and he talked to me and said, "I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to go in the Army." This is after the war started. My oldest son had been wounded. My wife, like your mom, was very apprehensive,
Yeah.
and he told me that he didn't feel college was going to challenge him in the ways he wanted to be challenged. And so I said, "Well, you're going to have to convince your mom because it's going to be tough." And he convinced her, and she said, "Well, looks like you're going to follow in your brother's footsteps."
Yeah.
And he said, "I'm going to follow in their footsteps, but I'm going to make my own footprints."
Yeah.
And this is a 17-year-old kid. It was very profound. But I was just thinking here, talking to you, some of the funny stories. When I talk to them about their deployments and things, I would say, "Tell me a funny story," or training or whatever. The hard, tough stories are very personal. And I don't feel it's my place to ask them those questions. If they want to talk to me about that, they'll bring it up. And I'm all ears and I'll listen and give any advice. But they are really their stories, their personal stories. And so I don't intercede myself into that. But, talking about medics, Kurt, my middle son, tells me about, all the stuff they have to do to each other to learn, giving each other IVs, taking blood, sticking tubes up their nose to intubate, down their throat, all that stuff. And they laugh about it. They laugh, and it was tough. I mean, it's and painful
fun at the time.
Yeah. And so and then he gets into a position where he's training medics below him at one point, watching them go through it, and laughing all the way. So, they've had a lot of fun in their service also. And that's something for people to understand too. It's not just total warfare. I mean, you make good friends, you have fun. I mean, they at Fort Benning, they're playing soccer, they're playing baseball with their buddies. It's kind of a nation within a nation,
Yeah.
or an island within in a nation. But the friendships that they develop are, of course, much higher than anything they developed in high school, because you're with a group of people, men and women, for 24/7 in some very tough situations, which obviously you were. You developed from your injury. You had a traumatic brain injury and some PTS and some spinal. All three things that create big hurdles for you to move forward. And you don't get over these things overnight. And so you had some transition time, not transition, but you had about a year going back and forth to Landstuhl to Vincenza, and that kind of gave you some time to decompress and think about your future. And look at you now. I mean, it's just incredible. But you made a decision to go into this field, and you told me a story about your training in these zebrafish, I guess.
Yeah.
Tell us that story, because I think it's one of the neatest stories that we've heard.
Yeah. So, I did a lot of my undergrad and my PhD work with a preclinical model or an animal model called zebrafish. They're, these little like 1.5 to 2-inch fish. You can buy them at Walmart, Myers, King Supers, depending on where you're at. But what's really unique about them is that they're just super regenerative. From the moment they're born to the very end of their life, they can grow parts of their eyes, their heart, their brain. Almost everything can regrow. You can basically cut out a portion of the brain and leave them alone, and they'll regrow it.
Wow.
And so what's kind of unique about it is, most traumatic brain injury research is done in rodents. They're done in mice and rats. And, they're great models, but one, they're expensive. They're very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
A normal rodent, a single one, might cost about $20. A zebrafish costs about 5 cents. But more importantly, in a rodent, they don't have the ability to regenerate. So you can only injure the animal and then look at how the injury progresses.
The effects, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas in zebrafish, I can injure them. And I get an injury response and an injury progression. So they have seizures and brain bleeds and memory issues, PTSD, anxiety, things like that. But a couple of days later, they have adult stem cells that start to proliferate and regenerate. And after, depending on the severity of the injury, they start to regenerate and come back to normal in about, a week and a half to a month, depending on the severity of the injury. And so the model allowed us to look at both how injury occurs and the inflammation response and things that are happening immediately following injury, which is super important in the ability to sustain life in humans immediately following an injury, but as well as a better understanding of how are these animals healing themselves innately, just all on their own. And at the end of the day, we share a lot of very similar brain structure and DNA and proteins. So if we can start to figure it out, ideally we could start to pre-program ourselves, especially for individuals like service members or athletes, to start to dampen the blow, no pun intended, but to really dampen the effect of the type of injury that these individuals unfortunately are they're most likely to sustain.
Yeah, I mean, just sitting here talking to you, it's amazing how many people you've helped, other veterans, et cetera, and the potential for this kind of research to help millions. And your thumbprint is going to be on that eventually. You guys will figure out the code on this thing. So I know for me, the person I am, I have a hard time sitting down and doing that kind of research. But we need people like you that are committed and have the patience to complete that kind of research.
It's an honor and a privilege to be able to do it, though.
Yeah.
Going back to a lot of my buddies that unfortunately were injured as well. I've been fortunate that during that transition period, I've learned to at least manage my PTSD, to find coping skills that help with my memory issues, my learning deficits. I experienced post-traumatic seizures, and I've started to get a better handle on, what impacts those. And so, unfortunately, a lot of service members don't. They haven't had that opportunity, or their injuries are so severe. So it's a real privilege to be able to go through the journey that I've had, to be able to give back to my community and continue that service.
You've written several studies and documents, and I think you told me maybe 8 documents on this subject, manuscripts, to the National Institute of Health. And it's just, to me, I mean, we're talking to you about where you've been and what you've done so far, but in reality, you've done more than a lot of people ever do in their whole lives, and you're still going. So it's incredible to think of, if we call you 5 or 10 years and say, "How you doing, Jayme? What's up?" And it'll be a whole news story of success. And I think that's what our investors like to see. We call our donors investors, because there is a measurable return on their investment. And that measurable return is seeing you succeed. And that's all we ask, is work hard, move on to the objective and goals. And you've certainly done that. And helping other veterans in the meantime. That's a beautiful thing about you Sentinels, is that you reach back, you help people in your community. I think 85% of our Sentinels are doing some sort of volunteer work. So, all right. So you're all situated there in Colorado, and you're
going back to the donor portion.
Yeah.
I am situated here in Colorado now. And a large part of the reason that I was able to make this move is actually because of you guys. Grad school, I was fortunate that grad school, at least when you're getting a PhD in one of the hard sciences, typically you receive a stipend. And not to sound ungrateful for that stipend, but it's typically not enough to live on. And you guys really came in and provided a lot of ability to breathe, a lot of ability to focus in on my studies, to feel comfortable to do what I'm doing, and ultimately, give me the opportunity to take this role that I'm doing right now.
Well, that's the proof in the pudding is that when we met you early on, and you guys have to write us a letter. You've got to give us some recommendations from other people and write us a letter as why we should invest in you. And we felt at that time you were a good investment. You certainly proved that true. So, I want to talk more to you as the years go on.
Absolutely.
And thank you for your service to our nation and your ongoing advocation for our military and our veterans. We are extremely proud of your accomplishments. Can't wait to see the future accomplishments, even though you've done more than most people do in their lives. So thank you, Jayme. It's been a real honor and privilege to talk to you today.
Thank you.
Yeah, we hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and we'll return next week to hear more of our series, Veterans Never Stop Serving. Please share our podcast with your network and friends. Thank you for your support of Sentinels of Freedom and the veterans we serve. Your support helps our nation meet its responsibility to these veterans who have served in our military and sacrificed much by doing so. They have certainly earned a place at our nation's table of opportunity and abundance. I hope to see you next week on the podcast. And until then, this is Mike Conklin and Jayme Hentig signing off.
All right.